The living conditions in the Industrial Revolution were not good. There was no sanitation codes, which means wash your hands after you do stuff. There was no regular garbage pickup. Garbage just filled the streets. Only 39 police officers for every 10,000 people. It's not very much. There's an increased crime rate, overcrowded prisons because of that increased crime rate, led to more crimes being punishable by death. That is unfortunate. Overcrowding in apartments, in a one-bedroom apartment, there would be 6 to 9 people in there. Disease spread rapidly because of it, and there was a lack of medical care during this time. Many people died from common diseases during this time due to the lack of medical care, such as a cold or the flu. Labor hours were 14 to 16 hours a day, roughly. 6 days a week, $1.25 per day for unskilled workers. And if you did have a skilled job, you got $3 a day. So, still not very much. Women and children receive 1/3 of these prices. Lowered costs for owners and labor market was oversaturated. The working conditions for these people, it was dark. Only light source was natural light. Very few windows, many dangerous machines which people got hurt from fairly often. Unprotected parts, so they were exposed and flinging around. Many machines being operated by very few workers. Everything was very close together. Very few break times during the workday, usually only an hour maximum. It was very dusty and dirty, which leads to lung diseases and such, which goes back to the lack of medical care. A lot of people died from it, from all the dust and dirtiness. Children had a lack of education, physical activity, and sunlight, which leads to physical problems, deformities in bones, legs, etc., and oftentimes shorter than the average people around the world.
Children as young as 6 years old during the Industrial Revolution worked hard hours for little or no pay. Children sometimes worked up to 19 hours a day with a 1-hour total break. This was a little bit on the extreme, but it was not common for children who worked in factories to work 12 to 14 hours with the same minimal breaks. Not only were these children subject to long hours, but also they were in horrible conditions. Large, heavy, and dangerous equipment was very common for children to be using or working near. Many accidents occurred, injuring or killing children on the job. Not until the Factory Act of 1833 did things improve. Children were paid only a fraction of what an adult would get, and sometimes factory owners would get away with paying them nothing. Orphans were the ones subject to the slave-like labor. The factory owners justified their absence or payroll by saying that they gave the orphans food, shelter, and clothing, all of which were far below par. The children who did get paid were paid very little. 14% of workforce in Britain was under 14 years of age. The treatment of children in factories was often cruel and unusual, and the children's safety was generally neglected. The youngest children who were not old enough to work the machines were commonly sent to be assistants to textile workers. The people who the children served would beat them, verbally abuse them, and take no consideration for their safety. Both boys and girls who worked in factories were subject to beatings and other harsh forms of pain infliction. One common punishment for being late or not working up to a quota would be to be weighted. An overseer would tie a heavy weight to workers' necks and have them walk up and down the factory aisles so the other children could see them and take a sample. This could last up to an hour. Waiting could lead to serious injuries in the back and or neck. Punishments such as this would often be dispensed under harsh rules. Boys were sometimes dragged naked from their beds and sent to the factories, only holding their clothes to be put on there. This was to make sure the boys would not be late, even by a few minutes. There were people in this time period that strongly advocated the use of the abolishment of child labor.
The Industrial Revolution witnessed a huge growth in size of British cities. In 1965, the population of Britain was estimated to be 5.5 million. By 1801, the year of the first census, it was 9.3 million, and by 1841, 15.9 million. This represents a 60% growth rate in just 40 years. Manchester, as an example, experienced a 6 times increase in its population between 1771 and 1831. Bradford grew by 50% every 10 years between 1811 and 1851, and by 1851, only 50% of the population of Bradford was actually born there. As enclosure and technical developments in farming had reduced the need of people to work on farmland, many people moved to the cities to get accommodation and a job. These cities were not prepared for such an influx in such a short period of time, and cities such as Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, etc., all vital to the Industrial Revolution, suffered problems not witnessed anywhere else in the world at this time. These cities needed cheap homes as the Industrial Revolution continued to grow. There were few building regulations, and then those that did not exist were frequently ignored. Builders had a free hand to build as they wished. Profit became the main motivator for builders. They knew that those coming to the cities needed a job and somewhere to live. Therefore, a house was put up quickly and cheaply, and as many were built as was possible. The Industrial Revolution saw the start of what were known as back-to-back terrace housing. These had no garden, and the only part of the building was not connected to another house, would be the front entrance. In Nottingham, out of a total of 11,000 homes in the 1840s, 7,000 of them were back-to-back. The building material used was the cheapest a builder could find. Cheap slate from Wales was commonly used. The finished homes were damp, as none were built with damp courses, and those who could only afford cellar dwellings lived in the worst possible conditions, as damp moisture would seep to the lowest part of the house. None of these homes were built with a bathroom, toilet, or running water. You either washed in a tin bath in the home, with the water being collected from a local pump, or you simply did not wash. Many did not wash, as it was simply easier. Stop.